You're listening.
You're listening.
You're listening to the Agency Podcast.
Hello, welcome to Agency Fireside Chats. I'm Michael Colling-Tuck.
I'm Katharina Bieniecka.
And I'm Charlie Litchfield.
Today we're going to be talking about why your keynote is damaging your healthcare brand, what healthcare companies do wrong at events, online and in person, what good healthcare event strategy looks like, and how to transform your healthcare event approach. Hi Kat, hi Charlie, clever to have you here today. Just to introduce you both to the audience. Kat, you are the former digital marketing and comms director for Zimmer Biomet. You've had a heck of a career. It was nearly 2 decades working with some of the world's leading healthcare professionals. And Charlie, you are the former director of the Americas for Touch Associates, event strategist planning, and you've delivered events for some of the world's largest healthcare brands. Done you justice there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. As always, director of the Americas. What a job title. It's, quite something. Gravitas. Good. Today, we are going to be talking about why your keynote is damaging your healthcare brand. And want to kick this off with talking about what healthcare companies generally tend to do wrong at events. And it's clear, I think, important to talk about events being online or in person. And we're looking at really the mistakes that kill your pipeline generation or damage your brand. So we're going to start this off with talking about the 45-minute time thief. And by that, what we're focusing on is that person who maybe has taken an extended keynote slot, maybe gone over their slot, speaking whilst healthcare professionals check their phones and demonstrate complete and utter disconnects from their reality and time constraints. We've all seen someone do that. Charlie, do you want to start this one off with any examples that you might have seen in the past? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try not to take up an entire hour just on this one topic alone. It's it can be a bit difficult not to sometimes. And look, starting with one of the last points that you made around that respect of time and overrunning slots and things, I think that's actually one of the bigger mistakes that a lot of companies use when it comes to events is not respecting their audience's time and constantly changing and shifting the timetable, saying, oh, this keynote's running 15 minutes late because the CFO spent an extra 15 minutes waffling on about last year's profit margin whilst everyone had a little afternoon nap. But specifically around the 45-minute time theft, there's actual science around this. And attention span lasts very rarely beyond 10, 15, maybe at a stretch 20 minutes before you start to zone out. Now, the exception to that rule is if you're binge watching something on Netflix, but that's an entirely different kettle of fish. So when you do have somebody standing up on that stage, often droning on for 45 minutes, well, more than 50% of the time they're spent speaking, your audience has tuned out and stopped listening. Unless you've done something to really keep them engaged, keep them energized, keep them occupied. I've seen it time and time again. And I think the example that I'd give that goes in line with that is not just around the length of time, but also around how you're speaking during that time as well. Trying not to go into one of our next topics, which I inevitably will do at some point, but I watched a guest speaker that I'm sad to say, actually, we as an agency hired. So we selected this person thinking it was a really great decision for this particular event that we were putting on. It was an internal event to a sales team, a relatively new sales team. This guy spent 40 minutes talking about himself. And just one glance, and I was behind the production desk for that particular event and just sitting there watching the audience, all the body language just immediately told you that this had gone down like a lead balloon. It had just not landed at all. So I think there's a really big thing, especially with the audience we're talking about. So we're talking about healthcare audiences. And if I focus on an external audience for now, and I think this is relevant whether it's in person or online, every single minute you waste in front of a healthcare professional is a minute that they could be doing something much more valuable. And in their mind, that is helping their patients or catching up with the endless admin they've got to do. There's a million and one things they could be doing. So you've really got to value that time you're spending with that person or those people and that audience and make the most of it. So yes, I've seen many, many examples of this 45-minute time theft. And it's often quite painful to witness.
Well, I mean, you're obviously a big fan of it. I can tell that from the emotion and the idea that it's probably affected a lot of your events. Kat, have you seen much of this in your time? Put people on stage who might have misused the time? What is it? Misuse? Is it misuse or is it just overuse?
Maybe it's abuse. What I've seen, it should be common sense, right? You have, especially at, let's say, larger medical education events, you spend the whole day with the surgeons. Obviously, they are there to learn something, so they interact with each other, and this is what you're trying to set up, right? For people to have something where they can interact, where they can talk and whatever. And then there's the dreaded dinner afterwards, right? Where everyone has spent a long day, they want to eat, and the organization just plans every slot, right? So you finish your starter and there's already someone standing up with a microphone. And then you wait until they've finished, and you sometimes you're serving 300 people and everyone is standing around with the plates ready to serve the next course. And then someone runs over because they have just so much to say. And then they manage to eat their main, and then there's the next speech and the next keynote, and people just want to eat, they want to be left alone. And you should, in those moments, you should really ask yourself, have I spent the day that I had with those people in breaks and in the exhibitions properly, or do I really need to squeeze everything into those 10, 15 minutes that they have between the starter and the main course? And this is where people tend to switch off because they're tired. You've been there all day. You've had your chance. You've had a chance to set up a meeting that really serves your purposes as well as theirs, and you don't need to squeeze it at the end of the day. And then when people run over and just drone on about themselves, that's where you really damage your reputation, and you don't want to come again. Or you just say, you know what, I'm going to go eat somewhere else next time. I don't want to be sitting here on a dinner for 3 hours because someone just can't stop talking about themselves. So yeah, I've seen it.
The thing I talk a lot about as a marketing agency is we're here to champion the audience. That's what I kind of see our job as doing. Because often when you're in the industry, you become very closely linked to your products, to your brands, and you become quite brand centric or product centric. I've seen it over every company I've worked at. And that is a thing, right? I don't think that it is, it's not necessarily a problem, but it is a bond that happens with you. And then you find it very hard to sometimes think outside of yourself. The key thing about any speech is it shouldn't be about you. It should be about your audience. And it should be about making sure that you're conveying messages that you want them to leave with. And I think the lack of planning sometimes around that is what maybe causes the problem. Ultimate speeches are TED Talks, aren't they? And they're only ever limited to 18 minutes. And I believe they're bringing them down to 13 minutes now as their length. And I think that maybe that's probably a better keynote speech length. Last thing I was going to bring here before, and I was going to pass this back to you. Did you know that there was a King's College study recently which dispelled this myth that our attention spans are reducing? They are, in fact, much better than they were 10 years ago. So when people say, oh, people have got less attention span, that is simply statistically not true and scientifically not true. I think what is true is they have less tolerance towards information that they find uninteresting. And as a result, their hand sort of slips into their pocket and the phone sort of appears, sometimes accidentally. And next thing they know, they brought up the website that they're most fond of going to. So you guys are professionals in this, right? You have coached countless companies and speakers. What sort of things do you think prevent ego-driven event design? And by that, I'm talking about planning around CEO visibility, marketing photo ops around the customer value, and signaling that you prioritize internal stakeholders over prospects. I'm laughing because I've seen this done so many times. Charlie, do you want to kick off on that?
Yes and no, all at the same time. Yeah, look, I think it's really relevant what you said there about the science isn't that our attention spans are decreasing. But I think the thing is you've got a lot more competition for your audience's concentration and their attention. It takes a lot more to grab hold of that attention. And if you can grab hold of it and engage with them, then you can probably keep that attention for significantly longer. I'm going to essentially contradict myself a little bit now after we just talked about the 45-minute time theft, because I've seen some really talented speakers engage with their audience in the right way and keep the room to the point where you could hear a pin drop in that room for a solid 45 minutes when it's delivered effectively. And I think that's the key, is when we talk about ego-driven event design, it'd be very easy for me to say it's all about sort of a CEO or CXO of some description wanting to be up on stage, wanting to press the flesh and have that handshake photo opportunity moment with their biggest client or a patient or whatever it might be. That would be a very easy way to explain this sort of ego-driven event design. But it's not just about that. It's about company ego as well. If you stand up on a stage and just start talking about your company and your product and how wonderful your company and your product is, people will switch off like that, because all you sound like is a billboard. And if people wanted just to hear about the about page of your company and how wonderful this groundbreaking new product is, they'd go and look at your website. I think there was something I mentioned in an article a week or so ago about exactly that. If the content of your presentation, whether that's a keynote or it might even be a breakout session, is something your audience could Google, don't bother, because everyone now has that technology in their pocket. So you need to be bringing a couple of things to any public speaking engagement, keynote, breakout, even dinners and things like that Kat was just talking about. You need to be bringing insight, so your own opinion and your own take on data or outcomes or whatever it is that you've seen elsewhere. But also you need to leave something, you need to leave a lasting impression or memory on those that are engaged with what you're saying. And this ego-driven side of things is often what causes us just to sort of stand there and talk about ourselves or our product, when actually a far more effective way of going about that is, and this really is a sort of buzzword at the moment, and you see it flying around a lot, but is taking a storytelling approach to things. And is just taking that angle of, instead of talking about our product is brilliant, it does this, talking about, well, a lot of people have a problem with this and suffer with that. It doesn't have to be an ailment or a condition or a disease or whatever. It could just be, we find that a lot of HCPs struggle with having enough time in the day to be able to administer X, Y, and Z. We found that other HCPs find this beneficial because it has an impact on that. That resonates so much more and grabs people's attention and gets them more engaged than simply saying, we've got a new platform and it saves you time. So I think there's a lot to it. There's a lot from our previous discussions as well, Mike, around things like set design of keynote stages and things. Like, you can spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on flashy LED walls and moving sets and even get the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders on stage. But at the end of the day, if what you're saying isn't compelling or insightful or thought-provoking or leaving something with your audience, they're still going to be on TikTok at the back of the room, or they're going to be the ones very carefully trying not to slam the door of the ballroom as they leave to go and grab another cappuccino and go and catch up on their emails in the foyer. And we all smile because we know we've been there. And this is the most effective measure of a non-effective keynote. Stand at the back of the room if you're an event organizer, and when that person starts speaking, see how rapidly people start to just very gently move to the back of the room and out again, because that means you're not grabbing their attention. If that's happening the first 5-10 minutes, you're doomed. You might as well just put the clicker down and walk off stage. because it will probably grab more attention than what you're about to say. Probably a little bit blunt, but yeah, I think there's lots of things that can drive that sort of, and it's a very easy trap to slip into, but lots of things that can drive that sort of egocentric design of your keynote and how you deliver things.
I mean, that's lovely, isn't it? When your keynote's competing with cat videos on TikTok, that's when you really know you might have missed the mark, isn't it? Yeah. Cat comms director, you must have seen tons of that occurring of you in your time.
Look, I wanted to mirror what Charlie said about, I wouldn't say your keynote can't be longer than 15 minutes. I've seen keynotes that were not, in fairness, they were not given by company personnel. They were really cleverly chosen external people, especially at internal events where you had people standing on their chairs cheering and didn't want to let them get off stage because they were just so good, because they were well chosen for the audience. The audience was really interested in it, and it worked well. So they overstretched and no one wanted to leave the room. It was great. So it doesn't have to be 15 minutes. But very often people who work in an organization, they are not necessarily the best speakers. If they are, super. Give them the stage. They will engage with the audience, but very often they're not. Personally, I think if someone is in a leadership position in an organization where things like that are frequent, they should invest in becoming a good storyteller, in becoming a good presenter. So, because even those 15 minutes can be detrimental to what you're trying to achieve, right? If it doesn't help if you're boring for 15 minutes, or if you're boring for 45 minutes, you're still boring, right? So it doesn't help. What Charlie said, the best way to remember this.
I'm sorry, that was my favourite quote ever.
It's amazing.
Please, can we make that? Please, can we make that the title for this podcast? If you're bored, it doesn't matter if you're boring for 45 minutes or boring for 15 minutes. You're still boring.
It's a fact. So for me, the best way to remember that, and also the best way to explain that, and I found that quite interesting because it really stuck with me. There's a lady who does communication training, has been doing it for 35 years, Nancy Duarte, and she said, you can't be Skywalker, you have to be Yoda, right? When you get on the stage, you're not the hero of the story. You're not Skywalker. You have a room full of Skywalkers sitting there, and they're the hero, and you need to help to mentor the hero get on their journey, go to the place they want to go, overcome any obstacles, what you've been saying, Charlie, right? We find that many people struggle with this and this and this, and this is how we can help, a bit more eloquently, but you get the picture. And to me, that's really, to explain to someone, look, you might have 800 years of experience, but, a Yoda doesn't just sit there and bang on about how great they are. Their job is to mentor someone else to greatness, right? Whether you want to have a better outcome for your patients, whether you want to have more precision in your surgeries, whether you want, levitate things or whatever it is you're trying to achieve as the hero. And what I also like, Charlie, was that you have to give them something to go out with. And this is the gift, right? The gift, whether it's something that you can use tomorrow. And that goes a bit to what you were talking about, Michael, is give them, it doesn't have to just first thing that comes to mind, give them a checklist that they can use the next day. Give them an easy way to connect with your salespeople on the particular question that you've thrown into the room. Give them a gift. Give them something on their journey that they can take away. If you convey that in 15 minutes, if you can do that, super, right? Win-win. If you need a bit longer, fine, but just think of your role when you step up there. You are not the hero. You're not Skywalker. That's not your role. And if you try and embrace that and think about how can I do that, then you're already on the way, understanding what your role is and who you are.
Oh, Nancy Duarte mentioned on the podcast, we've gone up a level here. She's one of my favorites. Her book Resonate was what I read, and when I read about her discussion of the hero journey with using Star Wars as an example, that had me smitten back in the day. I'm not sure I understood it when I think I read that at 25, and I'm not real sure I got it. And then sort of 15 years later, I'm still loving that analogy.
I'm now trying to map out the speakers that I've seen on stage and compare them to different Star Wars characters, and already I've got a Jabba the Hutt and a Jar Jar Binks immediately in mind. What I'll do is I'll just leave that there because they'll probably know who they are, and if they want to bribe me not to reveal their names in our next podcast, then that's fine.
The key about a good story is that it resonates, and I think Nancy Duarte's second book was called Resonate. If I might be wrong about that, I think it was. And the reason that the Star Wars has the breadth of characters that it has is because people find resonance with some of them. Some people identify with Han Solo, some people identify with Luke, some people identify with Leia. You know, different characteristics of, you know, gender or mindset allow you to kind of find that bond with some of them. And I think the key thing for the keynotes is to find that bond with your audience, because if you want to go up there and broadcast your news to them, that's okay. If you're certain that your news is relevant to them, you better be certain, because that means that you've got a very set audience, or your news better be pretty fantastic for them, not for you. And then the next kind of level of that is to be problem solving, which is to be talking about how you're going to solve their problems better than the competition. But ideally, I'd rather that people were up there being customer centric and talking about, this is how we're going to make your day better. And if you're going to make someone's day better, you better understand what their day looks like. And if they're watching cat videos, that's probably a good indication you don't really know what their day looks like, or it doesn't look like what you think it did. So you might want to nudge your marketing team to go and reassess what their challenges, barriers, and problems are in their world currently. So for me, go on, go.
Yeah, because one thing that I think people need to remember when it comes to customer centricity, it's often mistaken, and I've heard that happen often as well, is, you know, what you do is so great and your mission and, you know, so important, blah, blah. People are not stupid, right? They hear that at every other event. You're the greatest. It's so important what you do, blah, blah, blah. You're patient, blah, blah, blah. That's not customer centric. That's just kissing up to people, you know, giving them things that they've heard 1,000. That's not customer centric. Customer centric is understanding that you're on that stage. Without those people sitting there, you're nothing. Your company is nothing, right? They need to buy you. They need to buy your story, and your story has to be better than next door story. And there's a reason why they're sitting in your room today. So they've given you the benefit of the doubt. Don't disappoint.
Yeah, because your story is about them, right? It's about how you are enhancing their world. They're not coming to avidly sit and understand what your journey is looking like. They're saying, we're on it with you. Where are we going? And I think that's the key, whether it's an internal or external audience, right? That's the other key, I think. That's the thing that people forget, is it's both, right? Your brand has to appeal to both of those. And the idea of the mission statement is that we're all on a journey together, not we're on your journey with you.
There's a reality to all of this. When you're watching TV, occasionally you'll have an advert pop up for a donkey sanctuary. And I'm going to use Donkey Sanctuary as an example. There are plenty of other examples of charities out there that do this kind of thing. They take you on an emotional journey. They show you how bad things are for these donkeys and how they've been abused in previous lives and sort of malnourished, but actually this company is trying to make their lives better. And you can help that. You can be that person that sponsors a donkey by paying £12 a month. I deliberately went for the sort of the least controversial. I don't think anyone's really got a problem with donkeys. Dogs and cats divide society. Donkeys, I'm pretty sure everyone's comfortable with. That'll be the last time I say donkey in this podcast. Anyway, they are taking you on an emotional journey. And the reality is, as humans, we respond to emotion more than we do facts. If I told you that there are 1 million donkeys in the UK that are underfed and malnourished, immediately you call me out for that's just patently untrue. But that wouldn't generate any action from you. Be like, oh, okay, that's sad. And then move on. By taking you on that journey and bringing you into that story, generates an emotional connection, which turns into a belief that there's something you can do to help. And most importantly, that turns into an action that you then take. You will reach into your wallet. Maybe not today, but maybe the next time you see that. Or you might have a friend who likes donkeys. So for their birthday, you gift them a sponsorship of a poorly donkey at a sanctuary. All of that is based on the emotional connection that that charity has generated between you and the story. And that's what's moved you to action. You have to take the same into account when you're speaking in a keynote about your company, whatever it might be. You've got to take people on a journey. You've got to get them emotionally invested. Not only is it going to hold their attention, but that's the only thing that's going to move them from simply understanding what you're saying and absorbing the information to truly connecting with it and doing something as a result. And at the end of the day, that's what everyone's looking for from an event, no? An internal event that's got a sales team in front of you. You're trying to motivate them to take action to go out and sell more of your product. So that's the action you want them to take. How are you going to move them there? How are you going to emotionally connect with them to make them realize that that is the action you want them to take after that event? If you've got a room full of prospective customers, you want them to buy your product. You need to emotionally connect with them to take them on that journey, to move them to action. It may not be that day, it may not even be the day after, but you've left a lasting impression, and that emotional connection and that emotional story you take people on is critical. And people are using it in industries far and wide. Healthcare seems like an obvious industry to target that, because it would be very easy to talk about the pain and suffering of patients and things like that. To Kat's point, it doesn't have to be that shallow and obvious of an emotional connection. It doesn't have to be that much of a linear relationship. There are technology companies out there using emotional grabs to get you to buy their product. It may just be a little bit more subtle. So I think that's a really key part of the engaging with your audience, is taking them on that emotional journey. And I apologize for how many times I said donkeys.
I've never worked for a healthcare company that wasn't patient first. Every single one was. They were all patient first. And yet it was quite interesting, because I'm pretty sure every single one of them was healthcare professional first, because they used the product and paid for it. And then we had this alternative narrative behind that, which was when things were going wrong, we did it because the patient was the most important person in the room, except it was probably more the angry doctor who was maybe more important to keep happy at that moment in time. When you're talking about emotion, I think there are other angles to go at, right? And you've got to think about who's sat in that audience. Yes, we're all patient first. I don't think that's a given. You need to work out what your differentiation is from other entities. And that's what makes a story interesting, right? Because it's not the same story we've heard a lot of times. It's a different story. You guys are a bit different. That's a new way to go. Kat, in terms of applause metric addiction, that's a nice way to look at it. KPIs in healthcare are not that predominant in our industry compared to many others that I have worked with in recent years and studied as well. Agency is healthcare, but we do work with other industries, and a lot of those guys are very targeted on metrics. In terms of measuring success by attendance and social media buzz, I got 50 likes on the post where I stood in front of my event stand and said, "Hey, we're at number 53 at Arab Health. Come see us," which is, by the way, 90% their company liking that. Rather than qualified leads and scheduled follow-up meetings. What's your thoughts on this, and what's your experience with metrics at events?
Well, just to qualify, I'm not an event strategist or an event planner, but obviously been involved in the pre-communication, in the post-communication, and I do see that very often things are done because they just need to be done without really a strategy behind it. We need to just what you said. We need, we're going to this and this congress, and we need to communicate 3 times before we go there, and we show the booth and we show our team and we say we're there, and we say come and meet us, or we're proud to sponsor. We're proud to who cares, right? We're proud to sponsor. If you just read, we're proud to announce, or we're happy to, and it's just, don't read on, because there's nothing substantial in there. You can't start a post like that. You know, you could just say, "Don't read me." It would do the same effect. Don't read me. So
Delighted. Sometimes we're delighted
delighted. Oh
to
yeah,
be,
no, we're
but we're
delighted. We're
not.
delighted to be there. We're delighted. I mean, you're there every year. You're there every year, right? Everyone gets a program every year. They can look up, and they might just look up and see you there because you're there every year, and most likely you're in the same place, except you've expanded or you've gotten smaller. Rather gotten smaller, maybe they gave you another place. But this is just nonsense information. This is no use information. This is just doing it because it needs to be done. And if you do something because it needs to be done, because everyone does it, because you need to be seen doing it, you don't even need to look at the metrics, because they're just as meaningless as the communication that you're doing. And the same happens afterwards. And, you know, we've had those conversations often of how do you really measure success, right? And I will defer to Charlie to answer that question, because in my experience, it's one of the disciplines in an organization that has not the thumb screws on when it comes to proving that they're successful like everyone else. You know, in digital marketing, okay, how many leads, how many qualified leads, how many new customers, blah, blah, blah. Events, was it nice? Did we have fun? Was the customer happy? Did we have a nice video at the end of it that we can show on social media? To me, that's not good enough, but I've seen this happen for the last 20 years, and I don't really see in our industry a trend to do it better. But Charlie, you'll have an opinion on that.
Yeah, Kat, you've just uncovered events' biggest secret. Agencies and event planners worldwide are going to be running for shelter now, because it's true. The reality is that for, I'd say, decades, there have been KPIs that exist within marketing and comms teams, departments, where there are metrics in place to measure what success looks like. You're able to track a customer's journey through from a specific campaign to a buying decision. You can track all of that. And events, despite being a walloping great chunk of a company's marketing budget on an annual basis, has until relatively recently escaped that requirement, if you like, to justify themselves using ROI. And to be fair, some of it is an intangible. If you've gathered 1,000 people in a room to listen to your keynote or your latest sort of data announcement promising results, etc., how do you measure the success of how that message has landed? And the reality is that there are lots of technological ways now, but it is a bit of an intangible, because you're trying to measure how well that message has resonated with those customers that were in the room. But that being said, it's not really any different to how well the message from a digital marketing campaign resonated. Did that result in follow-up conversations? Was there an attributable value to attending that event, attending that session, listening to that speaker, that moved that customer another step on the journey closer to signing a contract, extending the existing use of your products, increasing the use of your products, whatever it might be? So I think the risk is that there's some metrics from events gone by where footfall was king, and simply a 10% year-on-year increase of pairs of shoes that crossed the threshold into your event venue was considered a big thumbs up success. I do think people are starting to move more towards that sort of more, what does that mean? Have we got the right people coming through? Would we actually prefer 10% less people coming, but the 90% that attended were better qualified people that we actually want to be in the room? There is a lot more thought going into that. That being said, there's still the Instagram moments and the sort of how many likes did we get? How many impressions did we get? How many people were sat in the room at the beginning of the session? And I very pointedly say the beginning of the session, because there are very few that measure how many were still there at the end of the session, which is a far better metric than simply who walked through the door for a comfy seat at the beginning. So I think there's improvement in the events industry in terms of that measurement side and actually holding to account. I do think there's still quite a long way to go though, and still a lot more to learn about how do we attribute that activity to, and it could be quite a long buying cycle, to be fair. I mean, that you might not see the results of that interaction until 12, 18 months after it's happened, but being able to track some of those touch points and see what value they brought. And there is the good old fashioned feedback as well, which is actually speak to your attendees afterwards. How did you find that session? Did you find it insightful? Did you take anything away from that? Would you come to our next event based on the experience that you had with this one? Again, something that's a little bit lacking, because I think some people are just terrified. They're like, well, we don't want to send out a survey. Why? Well, because we know it was rubbish. It's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one, but it is something where the needle is starting to shift. But yes, thank you for revealing the events world's biggest secret: spending budget and not having to prove why.
I think a lot of people will probably watch this or listen to this and feel that maybe we're missing the point about, well, these are complex topics that people are talking about. So making those complex topics is not interesting, is not always straightforward. Also, guiding your keynote speakers is sometimes a challenge when they're clinicians. I once remember trying to manage a clinician who was speaking in a different country for us over in Norway, and he flew over the evening before the speech and came and said to me, Mike, there's good news and there's bad news. And I said to him, what's the bad news? He went, I left my presentation at home on the USB stick. And I said to him, right, what's the good news? He said, the good news is the bar's open in 15 minutes. I've just checked and you can come rewrite it for me. So so in situations like that, sometimes survival and getting through the event is what you want, because never work with animals, children, embedded videos, or surgeons or clinicians, maybe, and it could be added to that. I'm sure, hopefully, if you're laughing, having similar stories listening to this.
I was expecting the good news to have been, I left it at home, but it was rubbish anyway.
Exactly. I did it and it was great because I ad-libbed. I want to add something to what Charlie said earlier, right? And this connects to what you just said, Michael, about, storytelling. And yes, we're talking about complex things. We're talking about mechanical things and robots and metal and plastic and stents and implants and whatever. But I think what people need to remember that a keynote, a speech, an event is one moment in time. You will not win the war with this one moment in time, right? You might win that little battle there, but not the war, which brings me nicely to the topic of personal branding, right? If you're the person who's standing in front of a crowd, they should already know you. They should know what your values are. They should know who you are as a person, how you represent the organization. You need to be visible. You need to show yourself to be someone that people actually want to meet when they're there, when they meet you in person, because they've followed your journey, because you've shown what your company does, what the people do, who you are, and I can't stress it enough. Values are something that need to be shown and not just said, right? What does your organization do to actually, pursue your great mission? What do you do? What are the behaviors that you are showing? What are the behaviors that your people are showing? And then you have your story already ready, right? You don't need to focus on this one point to get people in, to get your leads, to get whatever, because often the people that are in the room are not new prospects. These are customers you want to keep. Right? This is about loyalty. And how do you get loyalty? Not from one event, not from one great, you have God knows who you're inviting. No one's going to be loyal to you because you had a great keynote speaker that you paid £50,000 for or whatever. That's not it, right? It is a continuous journey. It's a clear strategy. We talk about authenticity a lot. How can you manage, no matter who you are, whether you're a great speaker, whether you're naturally a people person or not, how can you still manage to convey what you stand for, what your organization stands for? And then, when you open the door at an event, people might actually want to come in. You don't have to drag them in.
Okay, this is good chat, because personal brand is something I think healthcare struggles with, even though it's been prevalent within it for years. I know most clinicians do business with a person, not with a brand. That's how powerful the rep brand is.
Uh-huh.
but generally at the top, I don't see visibility of CEOs. Let's move on to and discuss this, because the second topic here is, what does good look like in terms of healthcare event strategy? I'm really keen that we've talked about the problems that have occurred. So let's flip the coin and let's talk about what a positive experience can look like. So let's go over our other topics again. We talked a little bit about timing. So if we talk about the 15-minute respect standard, this is focused, problem-solving presentations, ideally about how you improve their day, that demonstrate deep understanding of healthcare workflows and time economics. Kat, you were sort of impinged, you know, sort of starting to talk about that storytelling. Do you want to speak a little bit about that 15 minutes and why it's important? I mean, you did come up with a brilliant quote earlier, which was, if you're boring for 45 minutes, you're boring for 15 minutes, right? But in terms of talk length, surely there's a more optimal one than not. Am I wrong in saying that? What's your belief?
I would never ask. I would never ask someone to plan for 45 minutes. I would not, if I had my say, I would not allow a 45 minutes keynotes from an internal speaker, right? You know your people. If you're working in your organization, you know who's a good speaker, and it doesn't always have to be the CEO who stands there, right? What conveys authenticity, and we're all a team, and why not pick the one that is a really good speaker to do your keynote, to deliver the messages? Because as an organization, everyone should be singing from the same hymn sheet, right? Everyone should be able to convey the message, because no matter where you work, whether you're working in HR, whether you're working in finance, or whether you're at the helm, everyone should know what the organization stands for, right? If it's very technical, why not take your best sales rep to do that? Someone who's a real good speaker to do that for you, and just have a dialogue, have them with you. So, if I had a choice between 45 minutes, 15 minutes, I would always recommend do it shorter, do a punchy, short, really nice keynote. If you have to do it, can be shorter. It really depends on who you have, and know the people you have in your organization, and know who's good at delivering what it is that you need to deliver at that particular event. Maybe this is a conference where it's all about sustainability. You might not want to put someone there who doesn't really know what they're talking about, because this is also a part of authenticity. Not everyone knows everything to the same extent. Just get the people that know what they're talking about as a
Like that.
first.
But I mean, in terms of, we're going to talk about it in the next section about planning, but effectively, is the secret in the brief that you give to them? Because if you keep the brief too wide, their ability to go over 15 minutes seems to me to be very tempting, shall we say. Is it about the direction you give them?
Look, if this is an important event, right, there's more than a brief, right? If you know that these 15 minutes are going to be key, that you have 300 people in the room, 100 people, or even 10 of your most important customers, dedicate the time to that speech as you would if you speak to your investors or speak to whatever. This is key. This is not just, look, I've ghostwritten something for you, here you go, just read it from the page because a great communicator wrote it. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. Dedicate the time that it really deserves to deliver on that point in time, because this is valuable. When do you have the chance to have 300 people in the room, 100 people in the room, or even 10 that you really, really want to engage with? Value it, and give it the time that it deserves to prepare.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, look, going back to the timing side of things, it's difficult to be prescriptive because, like both Kat and I said at sort of the outset of this chat, I have seen keynote speakers engage with people for 45 minutes and keep them on the edge of their seat and engaged and enjoying it and things like that. So if you've got a very naturally talented speaker who's speaking about content in a way, and content that your audience enjoys and is interested in, if that's going to land, then great, go for it. I would think it's quite unlikely. There are very few people on this planet that can do that and deliver that well and keep people engaged. So for me, I mean, it may not even be that you say, right, you've only got 15 minutes. It might be that you say, yeah, you've got a 45-minute slot, but you are not to stand there talking for more than 15 minutes. before we break it up with something else. Now, that something else could be an audience Q&A. It could be bringing a couple of guests onto the stage to answer some questions about the subject that you're talking about, or they might be KOLs that you're interviewing about their experience with your products and that sort of thing. There's got to be something to sort of mix that up. And so the slot may well stay at 45 minutes or even an hour. But the key is not just having somebody monologuing for 45 minutes. You've got to not only mix it up and keep people's attention, but turn it into more of a dialogue. It's got to be a two-way conversation, because otherwise the people in the room are just like, oh, I mean, they're recording it anyway. And this is where we get into in-person and online. You go to an event, you sit in the plenary session, you watch the first 10 minutes, you're like, well, actually, they're recording this, aren't they? So I can just watch the shortened highlights on the plane on my way home. You've got to make people feel like there's an advantage to being there in the room, whether online or in person at the time. So I think that the timing, you don't want to be prescriptive. There's another part of this as well that I think is really, really key. And that's, forget the time for now. It's more about prioritizing the depth to which you go within the time that you're given. You talked about how some of these subjects can be quite complex. I've attended user conferences for technology companies that are speaking in a language I don't even know. And even I have been gripped by the session content that they're going through. Just the sheer complexity. They're talking about sort of cloud infrastructure and the way things talk to each other, and more acronyms than you can write on a piece of paper. But it was gripping in the way it was delivered. And these are really, really complex deliverables. But it's about knowing your audience. Because if your audience, I mean, surgeons deal with complex procedures and complex subjects every day. They've spent 7 years just training to sort of be able to do that in the first place, let alone the experience they've gained on the job as well. They're not stupid. So it's fine for the content to be complex as well, as long as your audience that are receiving it are able to process that. And there's a big difference between complex content that people are interested in and your CFO standing up and presenting 47 slides of profit and loss statements. And I'll just give an example of one of my pet peeves that sort of tenuously links to what I've just said, which is and I think everyone's heard of the death by PowerPoint syndrome, where you're sat there and it's just slide after slide after slide. And then someone behind the scenes has put the fade animation on one of the titles, and you sort of perk up briefly and then realize what it was. One of my pet peeves is when people put a slide on that's just so incredibly sort of complex and wordy, and then just read it to you. And that's the one thing that will turn me off from a keynote or a presentation every single time, is you could have just emailed that to me, because I could have read it for myself. I didn't need you to read it to me while I was sat in this highly expensive hotel ballroom, squinting at it on a really poor quality projection screen that's 3 miles away from me. So that's another one, is, as well as the actual delivery from a public speaking perspective, the authenticity, the storytelling, slides are a blessing and a curse. They should be a visual tool, a support, a bit of a crutch, something to prompt you to make sure you're staying on track. They should not be essentially closed captioning.
Slidegement. It's like a cross between a document and a slide, right? The presentation.
I've never heard that, but yeah.
Slidegement. That's Nancy Duarte. That is. They pulled that one out of the earlier chat. That Slidegement.
I mean, doesn't it blow your mind that we're still talking about exactly this? That you think, sometimes when I look at all the information that is conveyed through LinkedIn, just like, don't do this with your PowerPoint, you think, do we really need to tell people? It seems like the next generation that's coming up hasn't learned anything from the generation before, so everyone needs to be told again and again, don't overfill your slides, don't have 50 slides for 15 minutes. It just feels like, how is this not obvious. How is this not common sense? I can't believe that's something you would say. And you see this all the time. I just think, what does it take? Because if you're in the room listening to this, watching this, you think, this is boring. This is boring. And then you go to the next room, take your presentation and do exactly the thing to other people.
Mhm.
How? As if you
I
didn't
think,
know.
and it's a really good point, Kat, because I mean, I've been working events for a couple of decades now, and I remember within the first couple of years of working events, hearing the production team and the content strategists sort of banging their head against their desk, sort of how many times do we have to tell them to stop using 86 bullet points in their presentations? And I think there's two parts of it. One is a comfort blanket. So people that aren't used to and aren't well rehearsed as speakers, which by the way, I think can give huge authenticity if you're not overly polished, but that's another part of the conversation. People view it as a comfort blanket. So they're not used to using sort of presenter view and comfort monitors. So they just want to see their slide and then they know everything they need to talk about. There's that side of things. There's also, going back to the ego side of things, is people, both on the agency side and internally, are just too terrified to tell people that they're wrong. They're too terrified to just look at that presentation and say, I'm sorry, Bill, but that's rubbish. You can't present that.
I'm
Like,
sorry,
Bill,
Professor. That's
yeah,
rubbish.
absolutely. And it sucks. And obviously there are better ways to deliver that
Yeah.
sort of thing. You're not actually going to stand in front of your sort of KOL and say, that's rubbish. Go and do it again. No, you're not coming to dinner tonight until you've finished your homework. And then maybe you can have some bread and water. But there is that sense of, because it can be quite subjective and it can be quite emotive, especially if that person's written all of that content themselves. But going back to my sort of time within agencies, when we were able to get a content strategist or a producer involved very, very early, and we're talking not just the day before slide review, because at that point you're too late and you are just going to knock someone out into an absolute panic spiral if 24 hours before their presentation, you just basically tear up their presentation and throw it in the bin. But we're talking weeks, if not months beforehand. That person, that content strategist, is a single voice of authority around how the messaging should be landing at your event as a whole. Keynote, breakouts, they are managing the whole thing. And they are spending time with those speakers to curate those presentations. They're not writing it for them, but they're spending that time to understand, okay, what are the points you want to get across? Right, here's the messaging and here's how we're trying to get things across. So how can we pull that together? But how can we also give you powerful visuals that support what you're saying, but still keep you in the spotlight because you're our expert, you're our speaker. The power of having people that are able to have those conversations and work with speakers in advance of an event is huge, absolutely huge.
So there's my favorite quote that I pull out quite a lot is a Winston Churchill quote. And I wouldn't say necessarily I hold Winston in incredibly high regard. He's not even in my top 5 heroes, right? But this is good. He once said, I'm really sorry I wrote a long speech. I didn't have time to write a short one. And I think that in medical, I continually come across people who are highly intelligent, have an awful lot to say, and struggle to condense that. And I understand that being a marketeer, it's a problem that I suffer with too. The idea of please just make it short to them is a mammoth activity. It's a really difficult task. It takes a lot of time. And I think finding someone to help you do that is important. Also, sometimes subjectively, it's very hard to do. Roz Atkins is a BBC News presenter. He does wonderfully short, succinct summaries of problems. And he has a rule. He says that he looks at all of his information and he says he uses just 2 tests. Is it essential or is it interesting? And he says, if it's interesting, it goes. So having someone objectively to help you do that, I think is really important. And it's tough. I want to just move on to talking a bit about this difference between the vanity and the customer centricity. I think a lot of people will probably wince on this listening to the vanity, because I don't think they deliberately go out to make it about them. It just happens to be about them. And the equivalent scenario I think for this is weddings, right? I want to bring something relevant because we've talked about relevance in storytelling. Everybody's been to weddings. Everybody has seen best man speeches or chief bridesmaid speeches or maid of honor speeches. And often I've seen ones that were good. I've also seen some bang average ones. I've also seen some really bad ones. And the difference that I see between them is really clear. Often the people that do the really bad ones are the most gregarious, out there going people. So sometimes you can't pick them. And some of the people I've seen do the best ones were the ones who were quiet in the background and people thought they'd struggle. The key rule I have, the framework I see, is that those that struggle are usually trying to please a tiny portion of the audience. So the speech isn't relevant to the grandparents, the mother-in-law. It's only relevant to their mates. Whereas the ones who pull out the best speeches play to the whole audience, and often play to to themes that they all like how wonderful the bride and groom are, things that they've done great, things they've done well in their life, how they came together, what wonderful journeys they've had with them as a friend. And you talked about customer centricity. You talked about the misunderstanding of that. To me, I think that example sort of sits as a nice metaphorical guide in my head. I don't know how you see it.
I don't know which one you're talking about right now.
Sorry, no. So the idea of a speech at a wedding is very similar to being customer centric, right? Are you audience centric, or are you doing this and playing to a very small proportion of them, or maybe even just yourself? That was when it's gone really wrong, right? I've entertained myself for 25 minutes by talking about myself and pleasing my ego. I mean, that's bad, right? That's worse than pleasing even your mates.
I mean, it's to me, I always bang on about awareness. It's awareness, right? I don't know if people who give these speeches, give these keynotes, actually take the time to rewatch them themselves, to watch yourself and see whether you would be really interested in listening to all of this. Because what I find is that people who would not, and very often these gregarious speakers who can talk for an hour about themselves without even taking a breath, they are the first ones to take out their phone when they're bored if someone else is speaking, right? Just this awareness of you're sitting in the room and you find yourself, feeling your pockets for your phone. This is you. Just 2 hours later, this is going to be you, and people are going to be picking out, looking for their phones in their pockets. Is that awareness? And to me, your analogy there, it takes someone to stand up to that person and actually say it. What you said earlier, Charlie, right? It's not to say, you're rubbish, your presentation is rubbish or whatever, but give someone a real feedback, because I've never seen that happen. I've seen speakers who just talk and talk and waffle, and there's never any feedback, and they never ask for feedback either, right? And having the balls, having the team around you who can actually go to you after that event and say, look, this is what I've observed, emotionally, forget the, I'm not sure people like the blah, blah. I've seen 50 people walk out the room. Let's have a chat, right?
Yeah.
Because data often works, right? To say, as you said, Charlie, I've stood in the back and I've just been observing when people were starting to get disengaged. There's a respectful way of doing that. But if you can't get those people to have the self-awareness of realizing, and you don't have the team that gives you that feedback, it's a lost cause.
Moving from that applause to pipeline focused outcomes, right? That's what you're talking about there, Kat. So did I make everyone clap, or did I achieve the end goal of the talk? And I think, Charlie, you touched on that earlier, didn't you? I think you were saying about the KPIs and the importance in place. You've mentioned to me before that one time you had a piece of software at the front that measured people's visual engagement with the speaker. Is that right?
Yeah, we did that on exhibit booths. So we had, this was a while ago actually, this was before AI became cool. This is how ahead of trends I was. And we were using some tech to sort of essentially recognize, not facial recognition in terms of identifying that person, but being able to recognize common facial expressions and also recognize eye contact, and start to sort of measure their engagement with, and at the time it was exhibit stands. It wasn't doing it in a whole keynote, because there are plenty of fun issues with how you might do that in a large ballroom. Yeah, it was quite a creative way of measuring engagement. And I think just going to what Kat was saying about creating this sort of more customer-centric approach to things, and sort of having that awareness of who you're speaking to. You know my favorite subject, Mike, and that's data-driven decision making. And that, for me, is something that I think is quite underused within keynotes, and certainly the preparation behind speaking, is we capture so much data now on who is going to be in the room. And you can even in real time, and this might be going a little bit space age, but if you're tracking who's coming into that keynote session, if it's part of a wider event, in real time, you could be providing to your speaker on a comfort monitor or behind the stage before they walk on the exact proportion of, let's say, surgeons, administrators, and internal staff that are sat in that room. And if they're good, if they're really good and they've been well prepped and they've been well coached beforehand, they should be able to immediately adapt their approach to speak to the larger audience, or to engage with all three different types of audience members that are there, and keep all different types of people. Because at the end of the day, a surgeon that's sat in your keynote is going to have different priorities to an administrator, different priorities to a member of your sales team. They're all going to have different things that are going to produce outcomes for them from that session. So having that awareness, it's not quite as linear, as binary as just saying, well, either it's external or internal. There's so many sort of variations that go within that. This all comes down to effective coaching and preparation for me. And the feedback thing is really key, but the feedback is sort of the afterwards. The before is really, really key in terms of prepping for how do we want to engage with this audience, that audience, the other audience. And you should be able to do some of that by data. Not only with data of who's going to be in the room, but also perhaps data from feedback from previous events as well. We had feedback from 10% of the attendees of our last keynote that they found it boring. Brilliant, let's make it less boring. Obviously, that's not the most useful feedback in the world, but you kind of get where I'm coming from.
Okay, so let's go on to that then. So, how do you transform your approach to keynote events? What are the practical steps that we can give the audience to build credibility and generate qualified KPIs? I think it is the key focus. I'm with you, Charlie. If there's no point to it, why are we doing it in the first place? And I've asked that question many a time. And again, applause is lovely, but we're not there to entertain, right? We're there to do business. So I'm absolutely about the KPIs. And but in terms of how we achieve this, Katharina, the planning question: how did you help, and how would you help people prepare for keynotes? What's your philosophy on this?
It really comes down to understanding who you're talking to and what you're trying to achieve. Where do you find them? What part does that play in your whole event setup, right? Is it at the beginning? Is it at the middle? At the end? It has very different functions depending on where it sits. Don't make it. To me, the planning, Charlie, is I think the cardinal error is just to leave people alone with it and just hand them something over the day before and say, look, this is the speech. Because you don't, you will know if you're working with those people whether they're good speakers, whether they're poor speakers, whether they're a bit more formal, whether a bit more gregarious, and you need to work with those strengths and those weaknesses, right? And this is how I would just plan it to see, okay, who am I? Who's the person that what does that person bring that is valuable for an event like that, for a keynote like that? If they're not, like we said before, find someone else or find someone to add to, right? I really liked what Charlie said, just get people on the stage with you to engage in a dialogue, someone who might just take a particular role that you would like that represents a particular value or part of the story you want to tell, and get them on board as well. Is really understanding who is the speaker, what role does the keynote play in your event, right? And then start planning. And as I said before, to me, not is criminal not to give it the gravitas in the preparation that it deserves, because you're setting people up to fail. And I would put it on the whole team. If your leader's keynote speech is poor, it's not just their fault. There's a long chain of things that have gone wrong. And you can start at the very beginning, the planning of what is it that we want to achieve, what are the messages, because it translates into your whole communication plan. It translates into your whole event plan, right? How do I set up the sessions? What is it that I want to talk about? What are the key points? These are the points that you can communicate in before. You can ask questions before. You can give the answers after the event, because this is what you've worked through. And this is how you also need to set it up with your keynote speaker.
Okay. I love that. And I think that idea about it's not the keynote speaker's fault, it's the team's fault is a lovely, lovely thought. And if they're boring for 45 minutes or 15 minutes, it's the team's fault. And maybe you should have told them what not to do before you went and let them do it. As a really smart few learnings from this. We've talked a bit about customer centricity being the antithesis to the vanity setup. Customer centricity is interactivity, because you're making it about them by activity. Charlie, have you got any sort of examples or ideas about how you replace keynotes with challenge presentations, peer solving workshops, compliance discussions, and natural opportunities for prospects?
I think the legal term for what you've just done is asked and answered. We should do interactivity like all of the things you've just reeled off. Look, I think it's balance. I think there are a million and one things that all contribute to your event success as a whole, and how that represents your brand. But focusing in on the keynote side of things, and specifically to your point around the interactivity, they may seem a little old and tired sometimes, but things like live polling, Q&A sessions, and getting input from your audience genuinely do capture people and do keep people engaged, because they see that they are contributing to what's going on the stage. The minute you're simply a spectator is the minute that you do start to lapse in concentration. You do start to think about how your email inbox is filling up. So if you know from the speaker who stood on stage, right, I'm not going to stand here and lecture you for 45 minutes. I'm going to give you a quick 10-minute rundown on the updates that we've got from us as a business, talk to you about some of the ways that we're helping to improve your patients' lives, but then we want to hear from you. So in 10 minutes, set your watches. We're going to be doing a poll to understand from you guys exactly what it is that you're looking for from us, and see if we can provide you with some answers right here and now. You've got them. You've immediately just grabbed your audience attention, because they're like, oh, A, there's something in it for me. B, I'm going to get involved. And C, they've already set a time limit. They've already said, I'm only going to speak to you for 10 minutes. So immediately there's expectation. There's almost a social contract that's been put in place there between the speaker and the audience, telling them this is not all about me. Identifying, yes, I am going to talk for 10 minutes, but it's not all about me, and we're going to speak to you guys as well, and I want to hear from you. So there's a lot of things you can do, and you can take that to a much higher degree. I mean, I've seen things that we've done with technology where you, for example, ask people to scan a QR code with their mobile and put in their top 5 sort of keywords that they hear in reference to this particular treatment plan, whatever it might be. Behind the scenes, I've got my technology team working furiously to turn that into a word cloud that grows on the next slide. And you see all of these sort of keywords pop up, different sizes based on how often it's submitted. It creates almost user-generated content. You're actually getting your audience not only to submit a question that your speakers then answer, but they're actually evolving your content, your presentation in real time. That sort of stuff keeps people interested. You can even go to other degrees. I mean, there are platforms out there where you can quite literally have competitive quizzes during your keynote, where people are hitting leaderboards in real time on the screen. And it's not expensive stuff. We're not talking like tens of thousands of dollars. Everyone's got these sort of smartphones in their pocket. You can do stuff like this pretty sort of cost effectively. There are so many options out there, and I've seen it done very well. I have also seen it done exceptionally badly, where people overuse it, and every 30 seconds it's, right, what do you think? Should we do this? Yes or no? People just lose it. You have to balance these things. And I think balance would be the one real message that I would want people to take away from this, because keynotes are often considered the main course. And unless you've got the NFL's latest MVP or Mariah Carey or the president coming to speak at your event, the keynote is not the main course. The breakout sessions, the technical sessions, the workshops, the networking dinners, that sort of stuff is the stuff that holds true value, not just for your customers, but also for your salespeople and internal staff, for creating real meaningful connections with the attendees at that event. If you start with that in mind, then what you should be looking to your keynote to do is to warm people up, is to give some more general updates, but also to sort of set the scene for what your event is going to be doing over the coming day, half day, 2 days, whatever it might be. Setting some expectations, asking for feedback from that large group, getting people excited about some of the content that's to come and some of the sessions that are going to happen, not trying to make out that this is the big event, because if you go down that route, we're back to ego again.
Social contracts, user-generated content, knowing you're not the main event there, are all very straightforward ways to be instantly customer-centric. I mean, that by proxy, they are customer-centric activities. So, because they're about them. I like that. So last topic is, how do you overhaul your success metrics? So this is about tracking progressions, looking at KPIs, follow-up meetings, newsletter signups. Kat, you must have looked at all of this over your time from the digital marketing side of things particularly. What's your thinking on how companies can plan to do this better?
To me, again, it comes down to planning. Is what is it that you want to achieve? You have to know before what you want to achieve. What's the baseline you're starting from? Where do you want to get? What do you want? And then start to think of how you can measure it. Right? It's not going to be, sometimes these vanity measures might just be exactly what you want to achieve. Right? Depending on your event, you want to get 500, 1,000, 2,000, 50,000 followers. So your event will be set up in a way that this is what you're going to measure, because this is what you want to achieve. If we talk about medical education, etc., and long sales cycle, it has to be something different. And you have to think, I don't want to say do this, or do that, because it wouldn't be true to what you're trying to achieve. It really is a question of, what is it that I want to achieve with this? What are my objectives? And then you can think about of how you're going to measure them. Right? Instead of just relying on, okay, we had so and so many leads on the booth, and to me the killer is, the person who gets the most leads gets, like, I don't know what, 3,000 euros or pounds or dollars or whatever. This can't be it. What is it that you want to achieve? Who do you want to reach? And then find a way of measuring, have I achieved what I wanted to achieve? That's what it comes down to. It really depends on the event. I mean, Charlie, you have more examples than me for that. But to me, it's knowing what you want, setting up the event to achieve what you want, and then finding a way to measure whether you achieved what you wanted to achieve, instead of taking just the standard, likes, looks, blah, blah.
There's very little I can add to that, Kat. I think you're absolutely right. If you don't understand what the outcome is that you are trying to achieve from that event, that session, that keynote, whatever it is, you are never going to measure the right things. And the one thing I can say with some confidence is that footfall and the decibel level of applause is probably never going to be a good indication of a successful program. But yeah, and I think it's about understanding the wider journey. One of the things that we said is that, and you can phrase it in two different ways. So we've said before, events are not just a moment in time. Kat said earlier, events are a moment in time. Both are true, but if we just treat them as a part of a much broader campaign and strategy. The reality is that is a step that a customer or prospective customer, a staff member or prospective staff member is going to take towards the outcomes or the actions that we want them to take. Being able to attribute that activity that's happening at your event, whether it's on a stand, in a keynote, in a breakout, in a coffee area, being able to attribute some of that activity to a successful outcome further down the line is key. And there's no one size fits all to how you might measure that, but it usually involves some sort of integration and application around your CRM, and measurement of where various touch points with your customers took place. Was it at that event? What was the feedback? What was the feeling? How did that move them along on the journey? I think, but I completely agree with everything Kat said. It's all about knowing your outcomes and knowing how to measure that you've got there.
Multiple calls to action, CTAs at events, right? People following your personal page, your CEO's page, people following your LinkedIn page are basic stuff. Newsletter signups, if you have one, event signups, surgeon visits, depending on where people are on the journey that hopefully you've plotted out, from them not knowing you to trusting you and using your products to advocating for you. CTAs for all people at all stages on that journey, and then afterwards measuring how many of them forms that CTA that you're looking for. That's what I think a good dashboard looks like at the end of the event. And hopefully that's in your CRM too. Good. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being on here. And I've really enjoyed this. It's been excellent. And I think my main takeaway is that if you're boring for 45 minutes, you're boring for 15 minutes, right? So hopefully we haven't been boring. And thanks to everyone for watching and listening. And hopefully we'll do one again soon.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.